Hello, hello. Happy Monday. Last Monday before Thanksgiving break. All right, let's do this. Chapter 18. This is a fiery one. A lot of stuff happened kind of in the 50s, which obviously, spoiler alert, led to the Civil War. So, a lot of stuff going on in this one. So the last thing we talked about last chapter was the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and how that is going to leave a lot of questions on what's going to be done with all that new territory, right? So that's kind of where we pick up today. So right at that time, there's another election, 1848. You've got the Democrats versus the Whigs. And actually, there's a third party here, the Free Soil Party, who's gonna make an okay run for it. Martin Van Buren, the famous ex-president. But kind of the one thing I wanted to point out here was the word popular sovereignty. So remember, you've got all this new territory from the Mexican-American War, and the big question is whether or not that is going to be allowed to have slavery there. And so basically both sides are going to straddle the fence. Nobody's going to want to come out with a pure, hard, we are for, we are against slavery, because they're worried they would lose a lot of people. Because at this time, political parties are still kind of found a little bit everywhere. They're based on interest and not just the word that we're going to use later, sectionalism. So that's going to kind of come towards the end of this. Okay, so popular sovereignty, what is it? It means on the issue of slavery that the federal government does not decide if it's allowed in those new territories or not, in those new states. But the actual people in those territories decide. So popular, whenever you hear the word popular, like popular votes, that means the people's voting. But here, so popular sovereignty, we've used that word before, means power, so the power is in the people to decide. Sound good? So Lewis Cass introduces that idea, and a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't. Why would pro-slavery people not like it? Because it would allow the potential for slavery to not be allowed, right? I guess you could argue the abolitionists don't like it either. They would rather be just all for it. Okay, so Zachary Taylor, why does he become the racehorse here? Because he was a war hero from Mexican-American War. I don't know if you remember his nickname. Oh, Rough and Ready. He's the guy that won at Buena Vista when it was like 20,000 men that he was faced up against, and he only had 5,000 men. So he became a war hero, and we've talked about how that happens a lot. Okay, so he gets elected. The Whig Party gets elected, which is going to be one of the last. The last. And then the gold rush happens. So Sutter's Mill, this is in California, they find gold. And remember, Mexican-American War, there weren't a ton of Americans living in California. So when they find gold, they're going to rush out there, hence the name, the 49ers. This is in 1849 when people rush out to California. The 49ers, the football team today, San Francisco 49ers, or the basketball team, Golden State, because of the gold in the States, just in case you didn't know that. Now, when you look at that picture on the left, there's actually a lot of kind of convicts and people with not a lot of money rush out there, because think about it, if you're in the East Coast or in the, the other newly states, you're not going to rush out there if you're doing really well. So it's really the people that aren't doing well, and a lot of convicts run out there too. Now, because they had such a rush of people, they get into this territory stage really fast and kind of past that. And so they actually apply for free statehood. Because if you remember, after the Mexican-American War, that territory, the Wilmot Proviso. Remember us talking about that? The Wilmot Proviso wanted to ban slavery from that new territory. Did it pass? No. So here they know that that's not the territory, can't be banned there, so they're jumping straight to statehood to see if that they can become a free state. Now the problem with that, it would upset the balance, right? Free versus slave states. So this is going to become a huge debate on what should happen. And obviously, so this is a major word of the early 1800s is sectionalism, where you have this idea that the North and the South and the West kind of are the reason that they're fighting so much. But sectionalism means that they're separate. Now, the South is like feeling pretty cocky now. They're feeling pretty good. They're making a lot of money. They have the majority in the House, although it's equal in the Senate. They have the majority in the House, which means they can veto any amendments, like the Wilmot Proviso. However, they're getting frustrated. Put my head up there. Okay, so this is Texas. We know that Texas got annexed. Well, the government wants to steal, just kidding, this land right here. And looking at that, that's a modern day map right there, but that's half of New Mexico. If you put all that together, half of Colorado, and that would be ripped away from Texas. Now, Texas is worried. Not only do they not want to lose land, but they're afraid if the government takes it, it will become a free territory. Okay? And New Mexico, on the old map, I don't know if I have a picture later, but New Mexico and the Utah territories, they're afraid that they're going to get that land and they will turn that into free, the whole kind of territory into free. Now, I just put California on there as just an example why Texas is worried, because California applied for free statehood. Maybe New Mexico and Utah would do the exact same. So that's one reason for sectionalism. Another reason is the Underground Railroad. I'm assuming you've learned a lot about this in like 4th grade. This is something I wish I could spend a whole week on, but basically they were runaways, obviously runaway slaves. The thing though is that it actually wasn't very common. People, or I think in movies or whatever, it makes it seem really common. But the masters were pretty scared of this because it showed kind of like an emotional loss. Maybe not a financial loss, small financial loss, but more of an emotional loss. And in this Underground Railroad, basically it was, it's not a railroad, just so you know, a system, kind of a way to get to freedom in the North. And a lot of people or abolitionists would house these runaway slaves and risk a lot for that. So the reason that caused a lot of sectionalism is because the people in the South felt like the North were disregarding the Constitution. You're supposed to return fugitive slaves, and you are not. So you are disregarding the Constitution, and that's a direct front to the South. Harriet Tubman, very, very famous lady of the Underground Railroad, former slave, couldn't read or write, but was never taught to read or write or allowed to, but yet organized this masterful Underground Railroad. There you go. There's a better picture of it. And all the different routes, and just the fact that, they had symbols and signals along the way of how they could house a runaway slave. And okay. So we got California. Texas is mad. You got runaway slaves. The country is starting to get really frustrated. Secession is mentioned again in the South. So the question is the Union going to last here? So back in Constitutional Convention, you have these hugely smart people, intelligent leaders. So here you've got 3 new leaders that come out. Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster. And so, like I said, disunity and secession is a real threat. So let's talk about each one of these. Henry Clay, how do we know him? He is the great compromiser, right? And so once again, he's actually going to say, let's compromise. He's getting really old now. We talked about Henry Clay a lot. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Poor Henry Clay. The Whig. But he ultimately does say, we do need to compromise. The North needs to give some concessions. You're going to hear that word and see that word. Concessions mean you need to give some things up to the other side. The North needs to give some. The South needs to give some. Unity is important. We need to worry about that. Okay? Then you get John C. Calhoun. He was very famous. First of all, look at that picture. We've talked about him too. He was, remember what he was in charge of? The vice president the nullification of South Carolina, right? The nullification crisis when they wanted to secede over the tariff, right? So, he's a little bit more strongly Southern rights here. And he says, basically, there's no question, we're going to keep slavery. That is not a concession. Southerners deserve rights. That's kind of, he said it obviously much more beautifully than I did. But then you get Daniel Webster, and he's a little bit more the new guy on the scene. And he's going to give the 7th of March speech, which really is one of the main reasons that after all this secession threat that nobody does secede at this point. Not for another 10, 11 years, right? So in this speech, he, just like his forefathers, Clay and Calhoun, compromise and concession. Basically, you do need to return these fugitive slaves. You do need to give more. The federal government is taking away from the South, but they need to give more. But at the same time, Southerners, we realize that slavery is not going to extend out into these territories. So we don't need to be arguing that either. So the main theme here, though, is compromise, and that really does help. Moral of the slide is it helps to keep the Union together, these 3 guys, for another 10 years. Now, in Congress at this time, so those are all the Southerners, right? Well, now you're going to get some Northerners. William Seward, who he's going to become a combatant with Abraham Lincoln later. But he's from the North, and he basically says that that does not matter what the Constitution says about slavery, that we listen to a higher law. What is that higher law? God Almighty. And that God basically says that slavery is immoral and inhumane, and that's the law that us Northerners will listen to, not the Constitution. Then, amidst all of this, President Taylor dies. And again, this is like a really confrontational time. And President dies. And so Millard Fillmore, he's the vice president, steps on in. Side note, there was a Jeopardy question that I nominated, final question, and it said, which president, this is a long time ago, and I still remember it because Mr. Marchman didn't get it, which president is the only president that has double letters, first and last name? I don't know. I got it. Millard Fillmore. Anyway, steps in. Terrible time. However, he sees the value of compromise here. And so he does usher in, or he approves the Compromise of 1850. Now this, guys, is a big one. So at this time, right, the North and South are fighting, and so both sides end up giving up something. So let's go through this, okay? Okay. To the north, California gets in as a free state. So they win that. Okay? Now look on the right. However, the remainder of the Mexican cession are territories, New Mexico and Utah, and they are open to popular sovereignty. So there's no restriction on slavery there, even though there was in California. So that is the compromise. Now the South is mad at that because popular sovereignty could close it to slavery, right? If the people choose that. Okay, so next over here, to the north, the Texas territory we talked about is going to be given up to New Mexico. And popular sovereignty again. So on the right, however, Texas would be compensated $10 million. Texas is not happy with that. All right, and then on the left, to the north, this is kind of a big one. The slave trade, the internal slave trade that we've talked about, right? International slave trade's been banned since like 1807. However, the slave trade in the United States, okay, is going to be abolished in D.C., the District of Columbia. Now, slavery is not abolished, not emancipated. However, it's the first time that the slave trade has actually been abolished somewhere that already had slavery. And then on the right, concessions to the South, the fugitive slave law is going to be stricter. And the North has to agree to the stricter fugitive slave law. And so just real quick, this is probably the most debateful, is that a word? Debated, there it is. Took me a second. Debated part of all of this. So just kind of some aspects about this. So there's more strict penalties for anybody who helped slaves. Now, those slaves, when they came back, there were no juries. They couldn't testify. And so, you could say here, like, masters could go after these slaves for various reasons, or ones that they had set free, they could go after them, or ones that weren't them, or anything like that. But the slaves did not get to testify at all. If it's like horrible treatment, they don't get to testify. And listen to this. Okay, the commissioner who presided over the return of the slave. Okay, if afterwards the runaway was allowed to be free, they got $5. This commissioner. However, if they were returned, they got $10. So, what do these commissioners want to do? Want to return the slaves. So, why is this such a big deal? Because a lot of people in the North at this time were pretty, like, moderates. They don't hugely care about slavery. Remember that we talked about racism and jobs and that kind of thing. But now this forced them to do something potentially that they didn't want to do. Before, they could just kind of not be a part of this, but now this is really forcing them. So the result of this is that it really actually increases a lot of the abolition movement, increases the anger of the North, and so the fugitive slave law kind of, unfortunately, did the opposite of, was not compromise. So anyway, just looking at both of those, the South would say they lost this compromise. And a lot of people would argue correct. I mean, they did. Political cartoon at the time. What the heck is happening here? Okay, I'm just going to tell you a couple things. This is Stephen Douglas, the guy that really helped the compromise go along. And he is on his hands and knees, and who is on top of him? That would be a Southerner. So basically you got the South on the right. And here you've got more of the North and abolition. This guy right here, the bald guy on the left, is Garrison. Remember him? He, right, wanted immediate abolition and emancipation. So this says, "Oh, Massa, Garrison, protect me." And then he says, "Don't be alarmed, Susanna, you're safe enough." And over here it says, "It's my turn now, old slave driver." And right here it says, "This is all your fault, Webster." And this is the Temple of Liberty, just basically showing kind of the craziness after this fugitive slave law. Okay. Okay, so here, so this is kind of what we're looking at. Sorry, so now you've got your Utah territory, your New Mexico territory that we talked about. Texas lost that land right there. California is a free state. So really, if you can tell, the South is worried that they are going to, this is popular sovereignty, they're going to lose that. Remember this territory right here. Oh, in a second, we're going to talk about that unorganized territory. Now, this compromise actually really helped the North ultimately. The North was still gaining support, like moral support. They were also increasing their manufacturing, increasing their railroads. So I think the book talks about at this point, if they had gone to war, the North might not have won. But the fact that this compromise lasts another 10 years is extremely beneficial for the North. Okay, so here we go. In pops another election. Franklin Pierce, Democrats, and then the Whigs put Old Fuss and Feathers. Remember Old Fuss and Feathers? Oh, yeah. In Mexican-American War, they think that we need to keep doing what we're doing with these war heroes. Franklin Pierce basically is a nobody, which is helpful in politics sometimes. We've talked about that before. He's kind of likes the territory expansion, but at the same time feels for the Southerners. He's pro-Southern, so that's, you see right there, the Democratic position is not completely sectionalized yet. They still are wanting to pursue the South as well. Okay, but Old Fuss and Feathers, as you can tell, does not have a great personality, and that's really the reason that he loses. So after this, the Whig Party is really kind of destroyed here. They're going to be split from here on out into your anti-slavery Whigs in the North, and then your Southern Whigs. So yeah, that party's going to basically die out, and a new party's going to arise soon, which is the Republican Party. We'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, now we're going to talk about some international stuff real quick, but this part's still related to the Civil War issue, or the sectionalism issue. Okay, so why is this related to sectionalism? In the South, at this point, like, we know America is America, 50 states. And you think about it, Alaska's kind of out there. Hawaii, even more so out there. So at this point, they're kind of like, well, Central America could be ours too. That expansionists. And the South would love the idea of expansion because they could spread slavery, right? Okay, so in Central America, over here, this isthmus, if I had a larger map, you know that the Panama Canal is not built yet. And so here you don't have any waterway to get through this isthmus. So Colombia is down here. The United States signs a treaty because they're kind of trying to get their foot out in Central America, that they have these trading rights here with Colombia. So they have trading rights here. However, the U.S. basically has to say that they will not take over this area. Okay? Now later, the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, same kind of idea, but this is now with Britain. And basically, why the heck are Britain and the United States signing a treaty about a place that's not theirs? Britain has a port. So let me look at right there, Greytown. And so America is worried that if Britain has that port, then they'll take over this isthmus, and whoever has this isthmus and builds this canal is going to get rich, right? Because you can make people pay a tax anytime they want to come trade. Anyway, they sign this treaty and say neither one of us will take over, essentially. I just want to see if I had anything to add. No. Okay. Alright, Cuba is next. We've talked about Cuba before and how the Southerners would love that area because it's very close. They already have slavery down there. Now the problem is Spain has it, right? Hey, look, I did a GIF for you guys. You're welcome. That one's like so common, that picture. Okay, well, originally America tries to buy Cuba. Spain like laughs and says no, like go away. We don't even want to talk to you about that. So then the government, under Franklin Pierce, decides, well, maybe we can do this by war. So the Austin Manifesto is basically this. There's a private meeting of these diplomats, and they're going to try and purchase Cuba for $120 million. And in this document, they're basically coming up with how they're going to do this. And if Cuba or Spain resists, then they're basically telling them we're going to invade you. However, before this actually gets given to Spain, this gets leaked. It's before Twitter, before the internet, but it gets leaked. And the Northerners go cray over this manifesto because it's basically trying to do something huge and international for slavery, but not in like Congress, right? Not in the way it should have been done. So that idea gets thrown away. Okay, so here's just kind of a funny, your book takes a pause and says, there are some other international things going on that we want you to know of. In general, during this time in the Civil War, our Congress is very focused on what's going on in the United States, but there are a couple things that are happening outside as well. So basically, Britain's going to go to war with China. It's kind of funny, but Britain basically, this is world history, Britain basically sneaks in opium and gets people hooked. Gets people hooked. Basically, rewind for a second, China's not trading with anybody. And at this time, Britain, a lot of countries are going out and colonizing and being imperialistic. So Britain's like, how do we get our foot into China? Well, let's just have a war. And so they sneak in opium, get the Chinese people addicted, and the Chinese people say, stop importing opium and getting our people addicted. And Britain says, no way, sucker. So they go to war. Britain, compared to China's military at that time, is just not a match, and Britain destroys them. So, unfortunately for China, they signed a treaty with Britain that basically says, okay, you have 5 ports here, and Britain get their foot into China through war. Well, America does not want to kind of be outdone because China has a ton of new exciting things that America doesn't have. So, America's like, okay, let's go sign a treaty with China as well, a Treaty of Wangia, and in this, they basically get treated as the other countries in there, and they get trading rights into China, which is a huge win, and the first time a treaty has been signed with China. China and Japan have kind of been doing their own thing for a long time. They do not get involved in all this stuff going on in Europe. Yeah, so that America gets a foothold there, and then they decide they want to get a foothold in Japan. And Japan, has been even more isolated They've been even more isolated in China. They've literally shut their doors for like 200 years. And so, oh, here we go, America. We come in, Matthew Perry comes in, these huge boats, huge steamboats, and it looks like they're going to just destroy their own way into Japan. So they come in and basically say, we would love to be trading partners with you. But they come in a pretty forceful way. Technically, he brings in like gifts and new inventions that America has, like trains and things like that. And Japan has been isolated for a long time, and it's kind of like, we're scared of you, and those things look cool. So they do. A year later, he comes back with even more boats to even scare Japan even more, who's been isolated, and they sign the Treaty of Kanagawa. Which basically opens kind of the door for America to trade in Japan. Okay. Again, that was just a random world history pause. Keep going. I guess it doesn't fit in. Like, once the Civil War gets going, they don't want to do that. Okay, so back to sectionalism. United States. Alright. This isn't like a current map. I just wanted to show you something here. So they've got California now from the Mexican-American War, and it is a free state, right? It's on the Pacific Ocean, which is a great trading location, especially to their new friends, China. Maybe that's why they tie it in there. Yeah. Okay, so how do we get to California? We could travel by covered wagon. That would take a very long time, right? Well, they decide we have this new land, we need to connect to it. Railroads are a thing now, let's do it. Let's connect California with the East. Well, now the question is, where's the railroad going to go? Is it going to go up here in the north, all the way out there? Is it going to go here in the south and connect kind of the cotton south and the exports there? It's a big deal. It's like Amazon. Where's their new headquarters going to be? That's a big deal wherever it goes. Well, what the South does is they purchase some land from Mexico. It's called the Gaston Purchase. And if you can see it down here, yep, there it is right there. They purchased that little area for $10 million from Mexico. Why? So if you think about geography here, what is here? The Rockies, right? And you got a lot of desert here. Well, if you try to build a railroad through the Rockies, it is a very, very difficult thing. Guess what happens later? Spoiler alert. So they're like, why don't we, if we get some land here, we can go underneath the Rockies and then come out on this side of the Pacific Ocean. And so once they purchase this, they're like, boom, we're going to win the argument. That is how the South is going to get the railroad. However, it's not what happens. A northern guy named Stephen Douglas basically says, no, okay, basically he thinks of a separate argument, but behind the scenes, he's a wealthy guy that really, he's purchased land up here, and he would love for the railroad to go through his land. And so, anyway, so what is he proposing? Okay, it's going to be called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. There's your railroad there. So, I don't know if you remember before when I was saying this is unorganized territory. He says this unorganized territory should become Nebraska and Kansas. And we split it into two territories, Nebraska and Kansas. And both should be open to popular sovereignty. Remember that word? The people decide if there's slavery there. Now, why would the South be open to this? Because now they get the opportunity for slavery. And he's assuming Kansas right here is right next to Missouri. It will probably become slave. And the North up here, obviously surrounded by free territories, it will probably become free. So it's a win-win here. However, there's a big catch. There's a blue line right here. Missouri Compromise line, 3630. If you pass the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it would undo the Missouri Compromise. Because remember, in that compromise, nothing above that line could become slave. Remember that? Remember, this is the Band-Aid that's been holding the country together for forever. For like 34 years, to be specific. And if you tear this off, who knows what could happen. And that, guess what? That's what happens. So this eventually gets passed. It throws away the Missouri Compromise. And now it's really going to open the wound here. Okay, what the heck is going on here? This has to do with Missouri Compromise. I thought I had. Okay, so this says the Democratic platform over here. This is a weird one. I'll give this to you. You've got Central America, you've got Cuba, and they're basically pulling the head down. They're pulling the chin down. And that guy right there is supposed to represent slavery. Right there says, murder, help, neighbors, help. Oh, my poor wife and children. This is supposed to be, I wish I could ask you this, but free soiler people, how could you go to the Democratic platform? How could you even kind of swallow slavery here and support this platform? That's what it's supposed to be going to. All those free soil people that are now supposed to just accept slavery here in Kansas. So, there's Stephen Douglas right there. How does this big effects here? The North is going to be much, much less willing to compromise. They don't want to compromise, especially after that Fugitive Slave Act and then the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which they thought they had slavery kind of pinned down. They're not going to want to compromise anymore because all the compromises they do get torn away. Abolitionism is going to increase. We talked about that morally after the Fugitive Slave Law. We talked about the Whig Party dying out. Well, now the Democratic Party is going to shatter. It's still going to exist, unlike the Whig Party, kind of. But now sectionalism is going to take over. And you're going to have Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats, and they're going to vote differently, and then it's going to ruin that party for a long time. And it's going to usher in the new Republican Party. And this Republican Party, which we'll talk about in the future, but it's going to take a lot of different groups of people, like free soilers, some Whigs, some Democrats. It's going to take a lot of people and really jump off very quickly. Okay? Okay. That was a lot. Good luck. See ya.